Yeah. So I think there are two parts to what you just said. So the first part is, what is the role of L&D when it comes to data? Mm-hmm. And the second part is, how do we therefore apply either a taxonomy or a hierarchy or a classification to data such that it is useful for L&D? Because probably that's the target audience that we're looking at, and that's what we've been investigating in our paper. So the first part, the role of L&D. Now, I've always thought that the role of L&D is, you have in a population, in a workforce, you have effectively normally distributed performance. People, you talk about people in a population, that whatever parameter we're looking at is going to be not normally distributed, most likely, or some approximation of that. And the role of L&D for me is that not necessarily to look at the top performers and look at the lowest percentile or anything, but to move the mean. So you have the mean in a normally distributed curve, and you want to move that mean, gain 5 or 10% in terms of performance, probably leave the top performers where they are because they're doing well, but try and move everybody else a little bit. And usually we do that through interventions. Now, the interventions themselves will have, again, probably a data profile. So we think about interventions in the academic or scientific world, and we tend to think about, like you were saying, so repeated measures or time series studies where you would take a measure and the person is their own control, or you might be thinking about A/B testing, pre and post testing, anything like that, where you compare two groups. And I don't think I've not seen a lot of that in the L&D industry over the years that I've been working in the L&D industry. But really, we're looking at, if my role is to move the mean in terms of performance, and I'm going to do that through interventions, then I need to be able to understand how to run an experimental study such that my intervention, the impact of my intervention, can somehow be demonstrated. And everything I've just said requires a certain amount of data literacy to understand what I've said, right? Have you seen this kind of thinking or this kind of approach to experimental impact through learning interventions? Have you seen that anywhere?
So, a couple of thoughts came to mind as soon as you were describing that in terms of moving the mean. One thought, and then I'm going to answer what you're just asking around looking at interventions to drive this and building out a design in terms of really truly it's testing, as you said, being experimental with learning. In order to move that mean too, another way to look at it to make that happen is raising the lowest common denominator, getting everybody on the same page. So fundamentally saying, where is my threshold from a data literacy standpoint, regardless of the role, right? So another area that you and I talk about a lot is HR. So HR is so impactful when it comes to making this happen across an organization. They have the ability for them to do that, especially when it comes to helping support from a career and full employee life cycle standpoint, is really, really powerful and really impactful. It can be, but raising that lowest common denominator, then you're raising the mean at the same time. Like, let's get everyone to here, and then you're pushing this up a bit, because then people can talk to each other, which is really important. I know that sounds very fundamental, but it's so important. From a experimentation, a research-based approach to thinking about growing skills, growing knowledge, growing abilities, we do this on a regular basis. We build in pilots, as I mentioned briefly, to see, is this content going to work for our target audience? We build out profiles. Who is the target audience? Who are we looking at? What skills do they already have? Where's their maturity in terms of those skills that we're trying to target for them? Often what we find is that, and as you were describing, you've got a range of people, even within a target audience. Well, then how do I support all of them? And sometimes that means looking at building out different pathways or different roles for different people. Maybe you build out mentorships. Maybe you build in group activities and interventions that people with more advanced skills help support people that are maybe more green, newer to this concept that you're trying to get them to do. You build that out, build out a pilot, and collect data. Do surveys, talk to the people, literally talk to them, have office hours, get their insight on whether or not this is making an impact for them. It could be immediate. It may take longer, but get through that period of piloting the content, piloting the experience itself, then go through the feedback rather, and the content at the same time, and say, okay, some of this is going to be one-off. Some of it is preferential. Some people are going to come back and say, oh, I hated the tone of that speaker. Okay, maybe we switch out the speaker, right? Like if you get down to the nitty gritty. Or did it strike them in such a, the content strike them in such a way that they are now changing their behavior? Well, guess what? Then maybe I don't mind the tone being a little off, because as long as they're changing their behavior, whether it made them comfortable or uncomfortable, I don't necessarily care. This might sound bad. If they're happy at the end of a training, I want to know, did it make a change for them? Do they see things in a different way? Are they looking at data now from a different perspective? Are they using data? Are they talking about data? Are they talking about the challenges? Are they thinking critically? That's going to be hard. It's going to make you uncomfortable. So you may not be happy, right? But if you're changing your behavior in a way that's going to positively, long haul, right, maybe in short term too, impact your day-to-day activities, the business itself, that's what I want to see. So maybe not an A to B study, right? Because that might be a little rough to do when it comes to learning. But in terms of piloting things out, absolutely. And then you have to keep iterating on that as much as you can within the space that you're allowed. Sometimes you can't do that, as we also talked about before. You told, push this thing out, let it be. Check the box, right? But yes, absolutely. We do our best for the most part. We pilot out content, we get that feedback, we have a conversation around what do we prioritize in terms of what we've seen, what we hear, and then what tweaks do we need to make in order to continue to refine this experience for people. Because again, it's not just learning, it's an experience that we want them to have. We want them bought in. We need to understand the benefits and the why for us in order to change that behavior. So to do that, we have to make adjustments along the way. And it never stops. It's really a living thing. So quick answer, yes. A to B experiment.
But that's the difference between, this is the business reality, right? Where sometimes you have stakeholders, they want a thing, and you implement the thing and then you ask them if they're happy. And that's not the same as finding out data from your population of users, your learners, and figuring out if it made a difference. And I agree that you can be unhappy and have learned something. I mean, I think there was a book that I read, it'll be somewhere on one of my shelves. There's a book that I read, it was something like Adventures in the Margin of Error, and I forget who the author was, but they were saying something along the lines of the most memorable lessons in our life is when we've been wrong. So you don't have to be happy to learn something. And yet, the base layer of Kirkpatrick that the entire industry is probably familiar with indicates that we need to collect whether or not people were happy. Did they find the room comfortable? Were they happy with the sandwiches? And that gives us a measure of, was this a good course to run? So it flies in the face of what we know, right?
Absolutely. It even makes me think, even from a marketing standpoint, you'll go into a place and they've got some places have those indicators, like the happy face, the indifferent face, and then the frowny face. It's like, I mean, was it useful? Was it easy to get through? Did I find my experience valuable to me? I know that's hard to put in frowny faces. That's the kind of stuff that makes an impact. Did my behavior change? Did I get something positive out of it other than, I walked away feeling jovial? Yes, we have to start thinking different about how we approach what we measure and look at it in terms of that long term. What are the business goals that I'm trying to achieve here? If I'm trying to get people to use this new tool because at the end of the day, it can save us millions of dollars or pounds or whatever currency you want to put it in, because it has so much ability to drive efficiencies and effectiveness, and it's going to help with communication. Well, do I care if they're happy initially? I don't know.
Yeah.